Hi, thanks for joining me. I'm going to try something a little bit new today and talk about the music on an album with a Tone Poet preview. But first, a shout out to YouTube user Notes and Tones for correctly identifying the blurry vision in the background last time was Brad Mehldau. Seymour reads The Constitution. I first heard about Brad Mehldau from my buddy Dan McKinley, who said, "Hey, there's this jazz piano guy who did a Radiohead cover." And true to my initial impression, um, Brad Mehldau does a couple cool covers on here, one of which is Friends by Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. So if you haven't checked out that album, it's a great piano trio album. It sounds amazing. And there's some standards on there, almost like Being in Love. There's a great version of that. And the cover of Friends is really something. So today I'm going to be doing a preview of the Tone Poet that comes out this Friday, which is Stanley Turrentine's Rough N Tumble. And I don't have any connections. I didn't get mine early. I'm not any sort of insider. This is a Liberty Records pressing of Rough N Tumble. So this is an old copy of the album, but I'm really excited about the Tone Poet reissue of this. I'm curious to hear it. I went ahead and pre-ordered it, even though I already own it here. I will be very interested to do the A-B. This is a really remarkable album, and I'm very excited about it. I hope by the end of this video, you will be too. It was recorded on July 1st, 1966. I file all my records in chronological order by recording date. So when I went to pull this out to show it off just now to make the video, I'm looking around at his neighbors. We've got, not right next to it, but in the vicinity, Miles Davis is cooking at the Plug Nickel, if you're familiar with that at all. And then very close to it, actually its neighbor just before, is the John Coltrane Live at the Village Vanguard, which just got reissued by Acoustic Sounds. If you saw my video on that series, this John Coltrane album just came out, and it has a very famous track-long song, Chasing the Train, which really kind of dumbfounded the music press at the time. And what is this? So 1966 is a time of an incredible amount of experimentation in jazz, and the format is really undergoing a pretty significant identity crisis by that time. So on the one hand, you've got kind of the pioneers or the searchers who are making what we might call like avant-garde jazz. Sonny Rollins had just recorded East Broadway Rundown on Impulse. You've got Coltrane doing Live at the Village Vanguard. Right after Rough N Tumble, Coltrane does Expression, and then also records a really remarkable album that I like quite a bit, which is certainly not for everybody, called Interstellar Space, where it's just John Coltrane and Rashid Ali playing drums and like bells and stuff. Unfortunately, there's not a very affordable reissue of that now, but maybe somebody will take that up in the not too distant future. So you have this family of kind of out there jazz, and in that I'd also count Jackie McLean's New and Old Gospel, featuring Ornette Coleman on trumpet. So if you are familiar with Ornette Coleman at all, he played alto saxophone primarily, and on this album he's playing trumpet. So those are weird and wonderful. In the same vicinity, you've got like Miles Smiles, and you've got Wayne Shorter, Adam's Apple. Joe Henderson, Mode for Joe. You have people that aren't abandoning kind of all the form and tradition of jazz, but they're definitely stretching out and looking for new directions. So for example, Miles Davis on Miles Smiles is with his Second Great Quintet. He's handing over a lot of the songwriting duties to Wayne Shorter, and Herbie Hancock is exploring with different piano ideas. So then we have a third stream of jazz happening, which is not third stream jazz, which is something different like Gil Evans, but a third kind of branch of things happening all around that same time, which is kind of like the soul jazz, sort of like Lee Morgan's A Sidewinder, kind of funky tunes, which really reflect the fact that for a great deal of jazz's history, popular music and jazz had, if they weren't exactly synonymous, a really substantial degree of overlap. And by the mid 60s, of course, with Motown, that wasn't really true anymore. So you do have these popular crossover hits. Again, I think Lee Morgan's A Sidewinder is a great example. Kind of pop songs, but played by really accomplished and impressive jazz musicians. So in that family, I would count this album, Rough N Tumble, with a couple of very notable exceptions. It's a strange album, and I think it's awesome. And I'm really glad that Joe Harley, the tone poet of tone poet fame, grabbed this one, and I'll get into why in a moment. But in the same neighborhood as this album, recorded chronologically, there's a great album on Capitol Records, and maybe you can keep an eye out for this one in kind of the bargain bin at a used record store, or maybe even at a Goodwill, because it's not on Blue Note, it's not on Prestige, it's not on any of these famous labels, just plain old Capitol Records. Cannonball Adderley's Why Am I Treated So Bad? And that's a cool album too. That's more in kind of the jazz as popular music. So what makes this album truly bizarre is the cast of characters. So we've got Stanley Turrentine. He's playing tenor saxophone. If you're not familiar with Stanley Turrentine, he is one of the most prolific Blue Note tenor saxophone session players. We've also got Blue Mitchell on trumpet, James Spalding on alto sax. Now, if you have been grabbing these tone poets, James Spalding is on Wayne Shorter's The All-Seeing Eye, which came out not too long ago as a tone poet, and that's definitely in the avant-garde-ish, or at least searching for evolution of hard bop, post bop music. We got Stanley Turrentine, Pepper Adams on baritone sax, and Grant Green electric guitar. McCoy Tyner playing piano. McCoy Tyner played for a long time with John Coltrane, so he's the piano player on Crescent, also just reissued by Acoustic Sounds, on Love Supreme, etc. Bob Cranshaw on acoustic bass and electric bass on one song, and Mickey Rooker on drums. This whole album, I'm guessing, was conceived by Duke Pearson, who was the A&R guy at Blue Note Records, also a great piano player and a great arranger. And he did all the arrangements for this. So one of the most fascinating things about this album is he collected this set of players, and they're doing things that are a little bit unusual for them. For example, Pepper Adams is famous as one of the people, maybe Pepper Adams and Leo Parker are the only two people that played on Blue Note that I could think of that became really masters of the bebop and hard bop idiom on baritone sax, which is I think kind of a more athletic endeavor than doing it on alto sax or even tenor sax. But we don't hear Pepper Adams doing the Pepper Adams thing, these really fast, impressive runs and licks on the baritone sax. So a lot of these players they're playing Duke Pearson's arrangements, and it's arranged kind of like big band music. So on any given song, you may have a soloist in addition to Stanley Turrentine. But when the first time I ever got this album, before I put it on, I looked at the back and I just thought, wow, what an incredible cast of characters, and this is going to be a cool what people sometimes refer to as a blowing session. You get together all these people that don't typically play together, and you play songs that everybody knows. Okay, so we're gonna play Love for Sale, 1, 2, 3, and then they just solo in order and everybody does their thing, and those can be a lot of fun. But this is not that at all. So we have Stanley Turrentine soloing on every song on the album, and then maybe there'll be one other soloist, and everybody else is really just kind of playing an ensemble role and kind of contributing to like the overall atmospheric vibe of the song. As again, this is a guess, but it seems like this was really kind of Duke Pearson's creative vision. And I say that because around the same time, he has like this Duke Pearson's Big Band album, which is also really cool. That's one that you can pick up on the cheap original pressings for, I think I got mine for, like $9 plus shipping. It felt like maybe I was overpaying, but I wanted it at the time. And that's a fun album too. So that's the first weird thing about the album. The second weird thing about the album is that, it really sounds like somebody, whether it was Duke Pearson or Stanley Turrentine or maybe Alfred Lyon, who was one of the original partners and owners of Blue Note. By this time, I believe they had sold to Liberty Records, but he produced the record and was still involved. Somebody was trying to make a hit record, or at least a record that had hit singles. So the songs here don't really go together at all. So you've got the first track, "And Satisfy," is just kind of like, again, for lack of a better word, if you're familiar with Lee Morgan's "The Sidewinder," like kind of one of these up, like funky, soulful tunes. The next song, "What Could I Do Without You," is a Ray Charles cover, and it's a really exciting feature for Stanley Turrentine's saxophone because his playing is very lyrical, and he doesn't. It's not like, oh, he plays a saxophone, it sounds like Ray Charles, but kind of sounds like Ray Charles. On that song, you have McCoy Tyner, who's really more famous for his work with John Coltrane at this point. And specifically his style of playing, not to get too musically nerdy, but he had spent some time experimenting, playing chords that are a little bit different than the standard chords that another piano player might grab, using an idea called fourths. And that became such a kind of trope for McCoy Tyner that he even had an album called "Reaching Forth." But it wasn't like Forth, it was Fourth, because fourths were kind of his thing. But on this album, he's just straight up doing a Ray Charles thing. And so what happened on this album, which is a really neat thing, and this is not the area of Blue Note that I'm most familiar with, but you have this level of restraint from these really famous top shelf players that is unusual at this point. They might just be playing in the background for a whole album and not taking a solo at all. Or if they are taking a solo, they're really doing something unusual for the way they're playing might be with another band leader or on a solo album at the time. So I guess maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Just take you through some highlights. So first track, "Rewind," "And Satisfy." This is primarily a feature for Stanley Turrentine and Grant Green, and Blue Mitchell also plays on this. So these three complement each other amazingly well because they're not afraid to play what musicians call, like licks, like predetermined patterns, and they do them a lot. So if you listen to enough Stanley Turrentine or enough Blue Mitchell or enough Grant Green, you'll hear like, oh yeah, this is that thing that Grant Green does. He plays a minor six with a tremolo, and some people don't like it because everything's not just like brand new and fresh all the time. But in the context of this song especially, they all complement each other real well because nobody is playing anything that's totally kind of like earth-shatteringly stressing the harmony or dissonant on the ear. They're just all feeling a groove out in a really laid-back way in their own playing. But then Mickey Roker's drumming swings super hard. And I mean that in like a, just like the general sense, like, oh yeah, it's like a swinging thing. But also, again, if you're not a musician, swinging has like a kind of a technical definition too, which is that when you're going to divide up a beat of music into parts, if you divide them evenly, you're not swinging. So if the song is like 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're dividing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, so that's not swinging. The more you make the divisions uneven, the more it swings. So to move from 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, that's swinging a little bit more. This song swings very hard. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So you have this very relaxed series of soloists who have a lot of synergy with their playing styles. And then you have a really kind of hard driving, hard swinging drum feel, which creates, I don't know, just a really interesting song. This could have been an R&B hit. And in fact, this album did go to number 20 on the Billboard R&B chart, so it was a little bit successful in that regard. I don't think any of these have gone on to become songs that you'd either know by name or, like, oh, I think I heard that in the car commercial once. But it's a great lead-off track. One thing that you can listen for if you pick up this album or just stream it, it's available on streaming services. You can check it out right now. That you don't hear Grant Green do a whole lot is comping, and you can hear him do it on this whole album. And that, as someone who plays guitar, was really surprising and kind of a nice little Easter egg on this album. There are albums like on Blue and Sentimental with Ike Quebec. People say it different ways. I think maybe the way I've heard it most is Ike Quebec. Anyways, Blue and Sentimental. On that album, Grant Green does play kind of rhythm guitar, but what comping is whether you're on guitar or piano, but on some instrument typically where you can make chords, if there's a rhythm section playing and somebody else is kind of playing the chords that go with the song already, you might not feel like you need to play the chords just, in the regular rhythm that everybody else is doing. And so instead, you might try to play something rhythmic that kind of accents the soloist or drives the soloist or supports whatever the soloist is doing to create some, momentum or excitement from within the rhythm section. And so that's called comping. And Grant Green does a lot of comping on this album in a way that is just like the way it was recorded. You can just hear a lot more of it than even in Blue and Sentimental. So Grant Green nerds will love this album because it's something that, frankly, I didn't go back and listen to all the Grant Green stuff I have just to make this recording for all of you. But it's something that, if it was happening before, certainly wasn't this prominent in the mix. So that was a fun thing. Second track, What Could I Do Without You, is, again, a Ray Charles cover. And it's just, kind of like the gospel, soul, jazz thing. Stanley Turrentine's playing is really beautiful and rhythmic and fluid and just long, cool lines that, again, it's not that everything is always original and there's no kind of canned licks or ideas. Even on this album, you can hear him kind of repeat little tropes of saxophone. I don't play saxophone, so I don't know like their official names, but every once in a while you hear him be like, and does kind of like a fluttering rising thing, and like, oh yeah, like that's one of the things that he does. But he does it, very tastefully and to good effect. Next track is called Feeling Good, and that's a bluesy thing. And I don't know if this is fair or not, but that song always just makes me think of Moondance, Van Morrison. Although I think this came first. So really maybe a Moondance should make me think of Feeling Good. But that's kind of the vibe, laid back, kind of a minor blues thing. And so that concludes side one. So side one, we have kind of, we have three different takes on really kind of like the African-American influence on jazz. Obviously it's, well, maybe not obviously, but like the history of that form is that it comes from these sort of Afro-Caribbean rhythms and musical ideas, and jazz is this American art form, American classical music sometimes people call it, which is very much inflected and influenced by the blues. Bebop was an innovation that came later, again, that is specifically kind of grounded in black music makers who wanted to move away from playing songs by white people in bands run by white people who were making all the money. So in addition to that tradition, though, there's also kind of what's called like the Great American Songbook, which are like Tin Pan Alley songs, and those songs were written by primarily white people. A lot of them were featured in Broadway musicals, and a lot of those songwriters were Jewish, and so that sort of like melting pot of jazz history has brought us to a time in the mid 60s where standards, the songs that everybody plays, might be a song written for a Broadway musical, which has long since been forgotten. Nobody knows what musical it comes from, but people remember the song because it had been, made popular by Charlie Parker on alto sax and then repopularized by any number of players since then, or could have been a blues song or a gospel song or a song in those idioms without having been necessarily like a traditional gospel tune or a blues song that has been around since the 20s. So side A is really kind of, I don't know if it was meant to be like an homage to that African American specific side of the history of jazz, but if you want to listen to it that way, that's what it is. Side 2 is a totally different thing altogether. So you flip the record over and you get a cover of Sam Cooke's Shake. So that song was a very popular song. It was recorded, I think, the year before. Fun fact, the B-side to Shake, which is just sort of like, like Do the Twist or something, just like a fun party song. The B-side to Shake was A Change Is Gonna Come, which is Sam Cooke's, civil rights anthem. So the A side, Shake, is the lead off of side B of Stanley Turrentine's Rough N Tumble. And I listened to the Sam Cooke one right before I push record here. And that song is slower than the Stanley Turrentine version. And it also is produced with kind of this like washy reverb. And the song's a lot of fun. But this version is it's faster and more laid back. But it's if you know the song and you just imagine a jazz band playing it, that's kind of what you get. So that's a good deal of fun. Stanley Turrentine stretches out on that. Track 2 on side B is the Burt Bacharach Dionne Warwick song "Walk On By." So now I think we're intentionally in the we're gonna go for mass appeal. Or maybe just mass appeal to black audiences and try a lot of different things, and hopefully one of these songs takes off because the Walk On By thing kind of comes out of left field. And the neat part about Walk On By here is this, I think, is where you can hear why Stanley Turrentine was such a prolific session recorder for Blue Note, because he can step into any of the idioms on this album, and presumably Walk On By, it was not something that everybody was playing at the time in jazz circles, and he can still sound very much like himself, but also very much as though he is interacting with the piece that Burt Bacharach wrote. And by contrast, Blue Mitchell, who's playing I Love on side A, and in generally doesn't sound either as comfortable playing on this. He takes a pretty short solo. He's either not that comfortable or he's just not that into it, because his solo kind of starts off in the laid back style that he's playing in a lot of the album, and then about halfway through it feels more like he's just kind of running up and down sequences of notes that outline the chords, just to kind of play through the changes and hand it back to Stanley Turrentine so he can finish playing this Burt Bacharach tune and get us out of there. So maybe that's not fair, but that's definitely how it lands in my ears. And then the last song, Baptismal, suddenly we have Bob Cranshaw playing electric bass, and the bass isn't very prominent in this version that I have. I'm kind of curious to hear the Tone Poet version, but on Baptismal, it is electric bass, and it's pretty hot in the mix, and it's not the kind of soul jazz groovy funky thing. I think I don't really know how to describe it. It's definitely more just like, okay, this is post-bop modern jazz. So McCoy Tyner is playing kind of more angular chords. He's not doing his Ray Charles thing anymore. And one of the interesting things about this is Grant Green doesn't sound as at home comping on this song. So I think maybe this arrangement of Baptismal, and I'm looking, it's not by Stanley Turrentine, it's not by Duke Pearson. I'm not familiar with the song. So if you are, please hit me up in the comments here and let all of us know about it. But I think this is put on as maybe a nod to everybody's like jazz bona fides, and maybe a kind of attestation to the fact that this band and Stanley Turrentine can be kind of forward looking and anticipate just like, straight ahead jazz without trying to be, popular or whatever. So maybe to catch the jazz snobs. It's a weird album. It's all over the place, but the playing is really outstanding. And one of the things, if you do stream this or if you buy the Tone Poet, which I highly recommend, to really listen to how different the songs are, but how Stanley Turrentine, there's kind of a through line of like the essence of very lyrical playing, long lines with pauses in between, and it's not just kind of like a mechanical series of da 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 notes for 4 or 5 minutes at a time. There's the music breathes, and there's phrases that are unique to the song, and also little canned ideas that he comes back to, and then contrast that with how the other players are or aren't doing that. So that could be something to listen for that might be kind of fun. And I'd say overall, especially on the leadoff track and Satisfy, I think because none of these players was sort of famous as like Lee Morgan or Freddie Hubbard or even Kenny Burrell as like a really smoking soloist who, or maybe Joe Pass would have been a better example, but someone who's just like an incredible technical virtuoso on the instrument and shows it in all their playing. And not that those people can't be soulful, but that when they want to access a gear that's just like pure Eddie Van Halen shredding, they can do that. Nobody on this album is really kind of that player. Even if they have the chops, that's not really what they're famous for. So there's a real feeling of everybody having a good time on side A, at least. It seems like it would have been just a really fun session to be a part of. You have these people who've been playing forever. They've all achieved, great success, in the New York jazz scene. And they showed up on this day, July 1st, 1966, sat down to some of Duke Pearson's charts, and nobody feels too stressed out by it. And it sounds like kind of a meeting of people who, if they weren't, good friends already, certainly were acquaintances and knew of each other. And there's a real feeling of camaraderie here. And again, you flip it over to side B, it's a little bit more tense. Not that the music isn't great, but we're moving away from what would be like a major blues feel and a blues in a minor key, again, like the Moon Dance idea, and like a gospel thing, to Burt Bacharach song, a Sam Cooke cover, and kind of like post bop, like I don't know, is Baptismal modal? I don't, gotta think about it. Anyways, so this is a real album of interesting contrasts and people playing in ways that they might never have been recorded playing again. So highly recommend. Where are we at time-wise? 29 minutes. Hopefully you might have been watching me on 2x speed. You could have listened to the whole album in the time that I took to record this. So if you're still with me, thank you very much. This is something I'm going to try to do pretty regularly with some of these Tone Poets. This is a really exciting series because they're not albums that people who are into jazz have necessarily heard a zillion times. So the question is, if you're not one of those people who's just like a auto buy everything because you're an obsessive collector, or you have fear of missing out or whatever, it's not always easy to know, is this album worth my $34 or whatever? And not that you have to have the same feelings that I do, But sometimes people wonder, well, why isn't it like a Blue Train, or why isn't it like a Freddie Hubbard Hubtones or Blue Spirits or whatever. Ready for Freddie, that was the one that came out recently as a Blue Note Classic series. And sometimes there's great albums that never blow up, not because they're not good, but just because they didn't. So I think definitely stream this album if it grabs you at all. It's certainly worth picking up the Tone Poet. I think it's going to be really amazing, and I think it's cool that we've got Don Was and his team doing Blue Note releases of some of the staples, and they're also doing kind of some out there things. I just picked up Don Cherry, whereas New York, I don't think that's a jazz staple by any stretch of the imagination. And then you've got Chad Cassim over at Acoustic Sounds, and he's doing a lot of the Verb and Impulse things that people are dying to get. And for Joe Harley, the Tone Poet of the Tone Poet series, it's awesome that he was involved with the Music Matters reissues, because he did his pick of the greatest classics in the Blue Note catalog, and then some other deeper cuts as well. And he has said on podcasts and things like that, he doesn't have a strong desire to go back and do that. So since someone else is doing it at Blue Note, it doesn't even seem like there's probably any pressure for him to do that. So instead, we're getting these really interesting picks, and we can always go back and revisit something that wasn't a critical success at the time and appreciate it in a way that it wasn't. Moby Dick flopped in its time. Might not be your cup of tea, but certainly there's enough people out there that think it's a classic. Is this a Moby Dick? I don't know. Certainly it's a lot shorter, so it has that going for it. Finally, if you want to play the game, here we go. Let me know if you recognize that album. I'll give you a hint. It's not the Moody Blues Days of Future Past, which it kind of looks like. And one last announcement here. I have some records that I'm going to be giving away to subscribers of this channel. I'm trying to figure out how to do it without divulging a lot of my personal information and opening me up to getting spam emails. I'm thinking right now what I'm going to do is announce like a live thing where I would just randomly select from some of the people who are on the live stream at that time, and I've got some goodies to give away. And one of them, for example, is almost flawless copy of one of the Eric Dolphy releases that just came out from Acoustic Sounds. I'll make a video about that soon. But side B starts with like a real weird, annoying pressing defect in the record. And the fine folks at Acoustic Sounds said, "We're sorry about that. We'll send you a new one immediately. You just hang on to that one." So I will pass that on to a subscriber of this channel once we get to 500 subscribers. I think we're at 498 now. So if you've got a friend you think might appreciate this channel, you can either altruistically suggest that they subscribe, or selfishly suggest they subscribe and don't let them know that soon there will be a giveaway, and increase your chances ever so slightly. Thanks for watching. And again, if you've got some insight to the tracks on this album or the genesis of the album, please let us know in the comments. If you know what album that is, let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching.